Okay, thanks very much, Paul, and good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to see you here. I will give you a very brief overview of the project, and then my colleagues will do all the hard work because they will present the results of what you have been doing over the last 4 years. Our project, which is called PROHEALTH, it has the subtitle Sustainable Intensive Pig and Poultry Production. It's a 5-year project. It started in December 2013, and as you can guess, we are now in the last 6 months of the project. The total funding we have received is 12 million, 9 million came from the EU, 3 million came from the industry. It is the biggest animal health project ever funded by the EU. And it is a consortium of 22 partners, 10 academic partners, and 12 industry, and it is coordinated by Newcastle University, and I'm the coordinator. We cover basically the whole of Europe, as you can see, starting from the east, UK and Spain, starting from the west, UK and Spain, and covering the east with Cyprus. I know it doesn't look very big here, but it's an important partner. So we cover the majority of the countries that are important in pig and poultry production in Europe. And it has been my pleasure to work with this group of 50 or so individuals. This is from our first consortium meeting in lovely Spain. So what are the project objectives? The overall objectives of the project are to develop an understanding of the multifactorial dimension of animal pathologies linked to the intensification of production. Okay? And this has been taken from the EU document, so if it sounds a little bit strange, we were given that description. And a secondary objective is to develop, evaluate, and disseminate effective management and control strategies for these production diseases. And for those who are not familiar with what are the production diseases, most of you I know you are, but just for the sake of speaking from the same page, production diseases are diseases which persist in intensive systems of production and whose prevalence or severity tends to increase with production level. So the more intensive the production, the prevalence or severity of the production diseases is increased. Now, you might ask yourself, why are production diseases important and why the European Union is spending so much money? Well, this is because, of course, production diseases have great impact both in the EU and, of course, worldwide in terms of system profitability, environmental impact, and product quality, and, of course, in terms of animal health and welfare. And importantly, their treatment and control is the major reason for the use of antibiotics in the food chain, and you are all familiar now with the issues that are around the use of antibiotics. And as a consequence of this, they are important in the context of sustainable intensification and EU food security, and in Europe at least, there is the trend towards sustainable intensification. For those who are less familiar, some examples of production diseases. The classical one is metabolic diseases, but some of the locomotory and skeletal problems are classified as part of the production diseases. Respiratory diseases are also part of production diseases. Gastrointestinal disorders like necrotic enteritis are classified as part of the production diseases. And of course, neonatal mortality as such can be considered a production disease. Now, historically, the way that we were approaching the production diseases was to focus on specific components of their etiology. Yeah? So, depending on your perspective, either you were interested in the pathogenicity or the agent that is involved in the disease, or you might be interested, if you're a breeder, in the genetic susceptibility of the host. However, in reality, there are many interacting factors which determine whether an animal which is subject to an infectious or a metabolic challenge will express the disease. And this is a schematic description of what might happen and shows the multifactorial nature of production diseases. And you can see some of the factors that are relevant to the animal. You can see that depending on the previous experience, for example, of the animal with the pathogen, its genetic predisposition might affect the outcome of the disease, but components of the environment and components of the pathogen, for example, if the pathogen is virulent or not, will affect the expression of the production diseases. And I have to apologize for using an example from pigs, but it's a very nice example because it's a very old kind of work that actually demonstrates the multifactorial nature of the production diseases. This is the effect of the environment on the post-weaning diarrhea of pigs, and you can see that if you have a constant temperature or if you have a variable temperature, you get very different responses in terms of how many days the animals are having the diarrhea. And you can see that if the temperature in the house is constant, you have less days of scour per animal than if the temperature is variable. So it is a very nice example of the multifactorial nature of the diseases. Now, in ProHealth, we have chosen to focus mainly on the animal factors and the environmental factors. Later, my colleagues will tell you a little bit more about what we did about the pathogens, but the focus was mainly on the genotype, the early life experience, the resistance and tolerance to challenge, and the previous experience of the pathogen, which are all animal factors. And from the environmental factors, we focused on the nutrition, the management, and the environmental stressors. And you will get today an example of what has been happening in terms of the ProHealth. Now, in terms of the objectives, I will not bore you with all these. I will go very quickly through the work packages, but these were the objectives that were asked for us or by us from the European Union. And as I said, do not worry about it because I am going to describe this in detail when I'm describing the work packages. The project is divided into 8 work packages, the first one of which is an epidemiological one. So you are aiming to assess the current situation of health, welfare, and performance across Europe, in pig and poultry farms across Europe, and to score the biosecurity and management practices potentially related to health, welfare, and performance. And you will see from the first talk that we have actually quantified risk and protective factors in poultry in a standardized way across Europe regarding health, welfare, and productivity, both in broilers and laying hens. The second work package dealt with neonatal survival, and again, you are going to hear about it. We did quite a lot on pigs and less so in poultry, but we investigated the vertical transmission of 2 pathogens, 2 important pathogens, and determined the optimal strategies, egg disinfection strategies, to minimize post-hatch mortality. So we have developed strategies to minimize that. In terms of the genotype and health, we addressed the more relevant traits that describe animal responses, and then defined the relationships between genotypes and production diseases resulting from well-defined control challenges. We are not going to show you very much about this, but if you are interested, I can direct you to that, mainly because there are limits on how much one can present in a single day. In terms of the farm environment, we basically focused on the role of the environmental factors on farm, on the expression of the production diseases, and determined the role of the microbial environment on the temporal expression of production diseases in poultry, and you are going to hear about it today and where has this led us. A very important work package was the characterization of the responses that we saw, and you are going to hear about it, about the novel markers we have developed for some of these production diseases. And this is perhaps the most exciting component of what we did, because it enabled us to develop novel tools of predicting production diseases. And then we combined all the things I have described so far into the development of practical strategies, and we tested the strategies we developed in intensive systems on farm, on effectively practical situations. So we carry out farm-scale tests on the specific strategies to reduce disease. Oops, sorry about that. Yeah. I'm going the wrong way. Okay. To reduce the disease prevalence in pig and poultry systems. You are not going to hear anything about it today, mainly because these control trials have only finished in April, so we are still developing these this work. Now, the EU was interested very much in the socioeconomic consequences of the control strategies we developed. And this was addressed effectively in the 7th work package, because it's important to develop economically sustainable control strategies, but it is equally important to develop strategies which are acceptable by consumers. So we spent quite a lot of time to assess whether consumers in different countries in Europe accept the proposed interventions and assess the consumer priorities in relation to animal antibiotic use, human and animal health and information needs. And we are going to show you something about that, and it's not surprising that different consumers in different European countries have very different expectations. And the last work package we had dealt with the dissemination, and this is a dissemination event, of course, and we were asked by the European Union to disseminate to all kinds of stakeholders, including veterinarians, farmers, and the light industry, and this is one of the outlets for the dissemination today. We are developing now some policy recommendations to provide briefs and recommendations on sustainable pig and poultry production, which will be used for the formulation of policy by the European Union. And our hope is that you will raise awareness for animal welfare in consumers and society via new media for the younger citizens, and I will show you how we did that. Now, where we are in terms of the project, these were all the objectives, all the tasks that we were addressing, and you can see that the only things we finished the commercial trials here. As I was telling you, they finished very, very recently, so we are not going to show you any results, but the last part of the project is going to be spent on the socio-economic evaluation. So when we started the project, what was the EU expecting from us? They were expecting basically 4 things, and we hope that you will be able to deliver this, and you will be also the judges of that. The first one was the scientific, purely the scientific objective, better understanding of the various factors involved in pig and poultry production diseases. And I think we achieved that. That was the scientific remit. The second objective was the development of multifactorial control strategies that enhance product quality, animal health and welfare. And we have done that through the commercial trials, but you are not going to be able to see the results so far. They also wanted us to assess the economic and social acceptability of the proposed strategies. And you will hear about that. And as you can see, the EU put very substantial emphasis on the social acceptability of the control strategies. And of course, the overall umbrella is that the outcome was expected to increase the competitiveness and resilience of EU pig and poultry production systems. So, just at the right time, a penultimate slide. What is the project's legacy? Okay, so if you're interested and you get an idea of some of the things that we are doing, we have our closing symposium, which will take place on the 27th and 28th of November in Ghent. You can send us an email, or we can send you an email, and you can come and attend the conference, which is a major dissemination event. We have just received funding, or secured funding, to maintain the project website for 2 more years. And the website, you can find newsletters like this one. We have produced 7 newsletters, and by the end of the project, we are expected to have produced 10. There you can find the project outcomes. We will be producing best practice guidelines and policy briefs. The first one is mainly for practitioners. The second one is mainly for civil servants and people who are doing policy. We are, of course, producing and posting our scientific outputs, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the online poultry journal we have created on our website. If you want, you can access it, and it's quite a useful outlet for the project's findings. So, thank you very much for your attention. This is where we are, and you will be the judges on whether you have been successful or not. But my presentation was effectively the boring one, and my colleagues are going to give you the much more exciting presentations with the results. Thank you.
Many thanks, Ilias. I think that is a really good overview of where we are. For those of us who were involved in the project, it was really important to have a board of people who were communicating with us and giving us the general picture, because part of the benefit is people from the field and academe working together. We have time for a couple of questions. Keep in mind that we will have a sort of round table with all of the speakers at 4:30, but if there's something particularly relevant to what you've heard from Ilias, now would be the time to ask. We've got 2 microphones.
Okay, that was an overview, so perhaps we can come back to that.
Yeah, but we do need to keep to time, but I don't want to go either ahead or behind on time on this. Would you say, in terms of pigs and poultry, Ilias, did you find it a particular challenge? This was quite an unusual project in in bridging these two species? Were there benefits or problems in doing this?
Actually, I would say there were quite a lot of benefits because there are quite a lot of commonalities between the two species. But the thing that I found particularly useful was the exchange between the two species. I think that the poultry, and mainly the broilers, have always been much more advanced in some of the ways that they are addressing the production diseases, and there is a much more clear integration. And we were able to exploit this advancement, if you want, in the poultry sector for the benefit of the pig sector. So I think it has worked quite well for the project, and it was not a challenge, it was a major benefit, I would say.
Yeah, thank you for that. If I had said that, I would be accused of bias, but it's nice to hear from you.
Yeah, I'd like to know why the scope of the project was limited only to the EU. Why was not, other countries was involved? Because it could have been better. I mean, if,
Obviously, you're absolutely right. Some actually of the issues that we are addressing are common to a lot of the poultry systems. Obviously, production diseases are not unique in Europe. It is the issue of funding. At the time that we received the funding, all the money came from the European Union. The European Union recognized that problem in subsequent calls, and they now have projects that involve other countries. For example, countries like China or India have become very important partners in European Union projects. So that reflected at that time the funding scheme, nothing else. And you're absolutely right, it would have benefited much more from the exchanges. There is no doubt about that.